So yeah, here we are. So thank you so much for making the time to briefly get together to talk about the Russell-Einstein manifesto. And I was just thinking maybe we could start by, perhaps you could briefly tell in your own words, what do you think about, what's the gist of the Russell-Einstein manifesto to you?
Well, they made it very clear. The words were quite eloquent, but they said it's stark, unavoidable. We will either end war or we will end ourselves. That was 1955. It's much worse now. They were writing in the wake of the first explosions of thermonuclear weapons, 1953, by the United States, then the Soviet Union. These weapons made it clear that human intelligence had reached the point, maybe descended to the point where it was able to essentially destroy everything. Thermonuclear war would be so devastating that nobody would want to be alive. And it's been a rocky period since. If you look at the record, we've come extremely close to nuclear war a number of times. The most dangerous time was just a few years after they wrote, 1961. The United States launched its 1960, actually, the United States launched its war against Cuba. By 1961, Kennedy had, after the failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion, had initiated a major terrorist war. We now have a lot of information about it. There was an official decision by the Kennedy administration in August 1962, presidential memorandum calling for escalation of the terrorist war, leading to an uprising in October 1962, which would be followed by a US invasion. Well, October 1962 is when Khrushchev sent nuclear-tipped missiles to Cuba, leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Many top analysts who were on the inside at that time, like Dan Ellsberg, who was one of the top analysts working internal to the government then, regard the invasion threat as probably the main reason for the dispatch of the missiles. Well, we know what happened. It came within a hair's breadth of leading to a nuclear war. And it's not the only case, either by accidents or reckless acts of government. We've come very close. The last couple of years, the threat has increased. Trump has dismantled most of the arms control regime. He left office just in time for Biden to salvage a last remaining piece of it within hours of its expiration. On February 5th, Biden was able to accept Russian offers to extend the New START treaty. It's the last remaining piece. But beyond that, Biden has picked up Trump's policies almost completely. The new NATO policy that Biden rammed through is virtually a duplicate of the Trump-Mattis strategic posture announced in 2018, which calls for preparation for war with both Russia and China. that is so far beyond insanity that you can't even find words to describe it. And now Biden has turned it into NATO strategy. There was a pretense. Just a minute, I have to charge my computer.
Of course.
There was a pretense that NATO was a defensive alliance that never really was very compelling. Now it's anything but. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, which ended the pretense, no more defense, and
I
NATO
remember
was
the collapse
expanded.
very well.
The reaction was not to disband NATO, but to expand, not to dismantle it, but to expand it. Became a global system. Its director announced that NATO's mission is to protect energy supplies and pipelines all over the world, which of course gives it the right to intervene anywhere in the world. And this next step, the Biden step, has been to convert it into an instrument of US escalation of provocations against both China and Russia, who are of course playing their own game, also increasing provocations. This is a drift towards the nightmare that Russell and Einstein warned against. Also, the increase in production of very dangerous weapon systems, expansion of potential war to space, expansion of militarized cyber war. It's all absolutely racing to destruction. I mean, you've seen, I'm sure, the report that just came out about UFOs. Okay, probably not worth paying attention to, but suppose there are aliens on those UFOs, they'd be racing away from Earth as fast as they could get, not wanting to have anything to do with the lunatics who are running this place.
Yes, that seems to make a lot of sense. And what I always come back to with this, it's the good old Roman cui bono at this point. Who benefits from this? Is there anybody, can one even think in those terms at this point?
Oh, sure. Military industry is salivating with joy. They're not trying to conceal it. Huge new contracts. They're already planning for the next stage of contracts, which will come for trying to find hopeless efforts to defend us against the new advanced weapon systems that will be created by China and Russia as part of this race to mutual destruction. So, for example, when Trump dismantled the INF Treaty, August 2019, and immediately followed the destruction of the treaty by deploying missiles which violated the treaty to tell the Russians, look, we mean it. We want to escalate the conflict and race to destruction. So please join us. So they'll join us. Then military industry will be asked with tens of billions of more dollars to find ways of blocking the new Russian missiles, and on we go until we finally wipe ourselves out. Meanwhile, wasting huge amounts of money while Congress bickers over whether to build a bridge.
Yes, that certainly doesn't sound optimal in the least. But so if one wanted to, can one even say an optimistic stance at this point? I don't know, but how does one inspire people to move away from this? It seems like a lot of it is fear-driven, or maybe a mixture of fear and the desire. I just watched a fragment of the Germany versus England game. And it is, in some sense, a similar type of pattern that, people worship what I think Toynbee liked to call countries, something along the lines of elements of worship of collective human power. So it seems like it's become just that. People look at it as, or many people, not all people, of course, hopefully not all people, but many people seem to look at it as a race, as some sort of a competition, just like in sports almost. And that's very scary.
It is. It's a frightening species, but there are positive steps. So, for example, just a couple of months ago, 122 countries agreed to establish the United Nations Treaty for the prevention of nuclear weapons production. That put the treaty into force. So there now is a treaty in force banning production of nuclear weapons. Well, unfortunately, the nuclear weapon states didn't sign it, but it's a step forward. And it means that, say, the United States, by far, the United States is way in the lead in military expenditures. Last figures I saw, I think the US was spending about 40% of global expenditures, and China is second with, I think, about 15%.
Yes.
Of course, per capita, that means much less. And China, of course, is in a much more dangerous position than the United States. The United States is invulnerable. China is surrounded by enemies. We have a ring of bases surrounding China, aiming at it with nuclear missiles. There's nothing like that near the United States. But we're way ahead of everyone else and leading the arms race. But yes, there's fear. And the fear is deep. Right now, everything is framed in terms of the yellow peril, when Congress tried to pass a limited infrastructure bill, which the United States badly needs. The country's collapsing. So to build fixed bridges and so on, they had to put it in a hate China framework. Can't let China get ahead of us. We got to fix the bridges that are collapsing. Condo collapses in Miami, killing probably 100 people. We got to rebuild because we have to hate China. Looking at the German-English football game is crazy enough, but take a look at this. To rebuild crumbling infrastructure, we have to do it to make sure that China doesn't get ahead. When a condo is collapsing in Miami because of rotten construction. What can you say about it? But the treaty is in force, and that means that popular pressure could move the nuclear states, the United States foremost among them, to begin to live up to its obligation under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to make good faith efforts to eliminate nuclear weapons. Popular pressure could do that. And I think the new treaty is a step forward. There are other possibilities. So there are nuclear weapons-free zones around the world. Those are significant. They not only restrict the placement and deployment of nuclear weapons, but they also indicate the abhorrence of these savage species-destroying devices. They're around the world. In fact, Interestingly, the New York Times editors, a couple of days ago, just had an editorial calling for something that I and others have been pleading for years, a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. That's the most important case of all. Well, there was a slight flaw in their proposal. It excludes the one nuclear weapon state in the region, naturally. So you can't touch Israel. In fact, as they put it, the case of the idea of Israel joining this is non-negotiable. Can't talk about it. In fact, which means it's null and void. But popular pressure to institute an authentic nuclear weapons-free state in the region could be very significant. It, first of all, would obviously end whatever anyone thinks a possible nuclear Iranian threat is. I mean, if you believe there is one, this would end it easily, without sanctions, without the threat of war, without the dangers and the savagery of the actions. An easy way to end it. The United States won't even acknowledge that Israel has nuclear weapons. Popular pressure could change that. Of course they do, and everybody knows it. Well, it raises interesting questions. US doesn't acknowledge it because if they do acknowledge it, it would bring up questions about US law, which imposes restrictions against any economic or military aid to countries that develop nuclear weapons out of the general international regime. Well, those are things that can be pursued with popular action. The general American population would be interested in knowing that they face a severe threat which could easily escalate to major war because of the need to protect Israel's nuclear weapons establishment. A lot of people would be rather interested to know about that, of course, across the political spectrum. That's why the political leadership and the media keep it quiet, but it doesn't have to be kept quiet. And the same is true of nuclear weapons-free zones in other regions. So take Africa, for example. There is a nuclear weapons-free zone in Africa, can't be implemented because of Britain and the United States. There's a British island, former British island, British colony in the Indian Ocean, Diego Garcia. According to the United Nations and the International Court of Justice, the island is part of Africa, but England refuses to agree. It's holding on to the island in violation of the UN and international law, expelled the inhabitants, all in order to allow the United States to establish a military base, which was upgraded to a nuclear base by Obama. So the treaty can't go into effect. It's not symbolic. That's the base that the United States uses for bombing Central Asia and the Middle East. Okay? I think the American population would be interested in knowing this too, if it were presented to them. These are the tasks for activism, and there's a lot more like it.